All right. Today we're going to deal with the upcoming feast that we have. It's the Feast of Dedication. So we're going to go into understanding the this feast and why it is that this feast came about. The actual date for the Feast of Dedication this year is December 7th sundown till December 14th sundown. It's also known as the dedication or the Feast of Lights, and the Jewish people call it Hanukkah. And but we're gonna look at the scripture and see what it says concerning. Most of the understanding of this feast day is in the Apocrypha. So let's go ahead and grab our Apocryphas and get into it. Mm-hmm. It's good to see everyone here, everyone online. It's good to see. We've been getting quite a bit of traffic to the YouTube page, so that's a blessing.
I tell you that last lesson was awesome.
Grace.
Yes.
Mm. It's online. It's online. Okay, so we're gonna go to First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 1.
First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece.
And if you remember from the previous lesson that we did concerning the war between Esau and Jacob, that we kind of dove into this a little bit. So I'm reading this to give some context of the time that the Feast of Dedication came about, and leading up to the actual event. So continue.
Verse 2. And made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, and so much that the earth was quiet before him. Whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. Verse 4. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him.
And tributaries means that other countries would collect taxes and would pay it to him, basically meaning he had rule over them. Continue.
Verse 5. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them, while he was yet alive.
So Alexander, he split his kingdom in four among the generals of his army who he had grown up with. Continue.
Verse 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years, and then died, and his servants bare rule every one in his own place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. Verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes.
And we dealt with Antiochus as well in the previous lesson concerning the war between Esau and Jacob. So Antiochus he stemmed from the one of the four generals that was given land that Alexander had conquered after he died. So they passed it down. Each general passed it down to their sons, Well, Antiochus was, was in the line or in the lineage of one of these guys. Continue reading.
Verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus, the king, who had been in hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks.
All right, let's jump to verse 20.
Verse 20. And after that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt. He returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel in Jerusalem with a great multitude.
So after he became king or ruler of the quarter of the empire that Alexander had initially acquired, he wanted more rulership. So he went into Egypt and he took over Egypt. Mm-hmm. So he's slowly acquiring more of the world as they knew it at that time. Mm-hmm. And after he went into Egypt and took it, then it says that he went to Israel and Jerusalem. Continue with verse 21.
Verse 21. And he entered proudly into the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and the candlestick of lights and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the showbread and the pouring vessel and the vials and the censers of gold and the vials of the crowns and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. Verse 23. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre, and spoke very proudly.
So when he came into Israel, he took all of the gold, all of the silver, all of the sacred things that were in the temple, and he massacred the land, which is what we had went into. So I'm glad that we had already gone into this a little bit, so we already have some understanding of Antiochus and what he did concerning Israel. Well, because of him doing these things, there was an uprising eventually, and there was a man by the name of Mattathias. He had 5 sons. One of his sons is who Maccabees is named after, which, we'll kind of get into that. But while all this is going on, he wasn't willing. He was actually a son of a priest, and he wasn't willing to just lay down and allow these things to happen. So between him and his 5 sons, they began a revolt. And so what he did was he saw all the blasphemy that was being forced upon his people, because when we looked into the history of this, Antiochus, he made us to sacrifice swine on the altar, which was an abominable thing. He made us to put down all of our laws and pick up the laws which he had established, which went against the Most High's laws. And so as these men that were not willing to do this saw these abominable things going on, Mattathias, he stood up and said, we can't do this. And he had a son in particular whose name was Judas. He was known as Maccabeus, meaning hammerhead. So just knowing that alone let you know that he was built for war. So that's where we get Maccabees from, because Mattathias' son, whose name was Judas, they called him Hammerhead, which is Maccabeus. And so that's what we're going into now. He became once his father died. His father was the one that rose up and said, "We're not doing this. Come on, those who are with me, let's change this." But his father died of old age, and Judas rose up in his stead to lead Israel into war, basically. All right. So that's the context of the Feast of Dedication. So with that being said, let's go to First Maccabees chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 43.
First Maccabees chapter 3, verse 43. And they said one to another, let us restore the decayed estate of our people, and let us fight for our people and the sanctuary. Then was the congregation gathered together, that they might be ready for battle, and that they might pray and ask mercy and compassion. Verse 45. Now Jerusalem lay void as a wilderness.
So at this point, after Antiochus had came in there and wreaked such havoc, those who were willing and wanting to continue in the law of the Most High, they left. They fled, because otherwise they were going to be persecuted. So, as it says here, now Jerusalem lay as a wilderness, meaning it had been void. The people that were originally there had left. Continue.
Verse 45. Now Jerusalem lay void as a wilderness. There was none of her children that went in or out. The sanctuary was also trodden down, and aliens kept the stronghold.
And when it says aliens, it just means strangers, or those heathens. Those who were not native to the land. Go ahead.
The heathens had their habitations in that place, and joy was taken from Jacob, and the pipe with the harp ceased. Verse 46.
Let's jump down to 58, verse 58. So we see here, this is in the time that Judas is starting to rise up his people. As we started in verse 43, he says, they said one to another, let us restore the decayed estate of our people. And so we see that there's come persecution, and then there comes someone that rises up and says, we can't accept this. All right, continue. Let's go to verse 58.
Verse 58. And Judas said, arm yourselves and be valiant men, and see that ye be in readiness against the morning, that ye may fight with these nations that are assembled together against us to destroy us in our sanctuary. For it is better for us to die in battle than to behold the calamities of our people in our sanctuary. Verse 60. Nevertheless, as the will of the Most High is in heaven, so let him do.
Okay, so here it is, Judas making his stand. He's saying, like, we'd be better off dying in battle and then sitting around here waiting for, this guy to come and get us. So he's like, let's man up. Let's be valiant men. All right, so let's jump to chapter 4 and start at verse 1.
First Maccabees chapter 4, verse 1. Then took, say that name, Gorgias?
Gorgias, yeah, or Georgius. I said Georgius. It could be Gorgias, either one.
Then took Gorgias 5,000 footmen and 1,000 of the best horsemen, and removed out of the camp by night. So
this Georgius, to give some context to who he is, because this name just came out of nowhere because we're skipping through. Georgius was a general of Antiochus. All right, and he was sent to deal with Israel because Judas had rose up and it had gotten word back to Antiochus. So here we are, he's sending Georgius to come in and to handle the Israelites. Go ahead.
Verse 2. To the end he might rush in upon the camp of the Jews and smite them suddenly. And the men of the fortress were his guides. Verse 3. Now when Judas heard thereof, he himself removed, and the valiant men with him, that he might smite the king's army, which was at Enemus, while as yet the force was dispersed from the camp. Verse 5. In the main season came Gorgias by night into the camp of Judas, and when he found no man there, he sought them in the morning.
In the mountain.
Or in the mountains, the water. For said he, these fellows flee from us. But as soon as it was day, Judas showed himself in the plain with 3,000 men, who nevertheless had neither armor nor sword in their minds.
Okay, so here it is that Georgius has 5,000 footmen and 1,000 of the best horsemen. Okay, and so they're going up against Judas, who it just says here, uh, who nevertheless had neither armor nor swords to their minds. All right, so it kind of sounds like it's a mismatch. But let's see what happened. Continue.
Verse 7. They saw the camp of the heathens, that it was strong and well harnessed, and compassed round about with horsemen, and these were experts of war.
Experts of war. Continue.
Then said Judas to the men that were with him, Fear ye not their multitude, neither be ye afraid of their assault. Remember how our fathers were delivered in the Red Sea, when Pharaoh pursued them with an army.
And so, like, this little pep speech that he's about to give them, you know, he's like, remember our past. We didn't have anything when we were fleeing out of Egypt. But the thing is, it's not our battle. And see, that's what's so key for us to remember as Israel. We can't beat them with swords and with our fists. They done built up armaments that we can never match. We'll never be able to match them in that. It's never been, that wasn't what we weren't blessed with that. They were. But what we have to do is stick to the Most High. That is our weapon. That's all we need. Continue.
Verse 10. Now therefore let us cry unto heaven, if pre-adventure the Most High will have mercy upon us, and remember the covenant of our fathers, and destroy these hosts before our face this day, that so all the heathens may know that there is one who delivereth and saveth Israel.
And see, the thing is, I think a lot of times that the reason that it happens this way, when we go into war, we outnumbered, or, you know, whatever the case is, it looks like the other side should win. It's so that all the praise go to the Most High. So we can't take credit for any of it. All right, continue.
Verse 12. Then the strangers lifted up their eyes and saw them coming over against them. Wherefore they went out of the camp to battle. But they that were with Judas sounded their trumpets. So they joined battle, and the heathens, being discomfited, fled into the plain.
And I just want to bring, just highlight verse 13 when it says, and they sounded their trumpets. You know, that's why it's so good to understand the Old Testament, because you understand why they sounded their trumpets. Yeah, it was the war cry. It was to allow people to know. It gave orders to the different formations. You know, so it's very important, even with, you know, understanding our holy days, understanding the feast of the blowing of the trumpets, and it's the reason for it. It's in remembrance of you know, us blowing our trumpets for the different reasons that we blew the trumpet. Continue reading.
Verse 14. So they joined battle, and the heathen, being discomfited, fled into the plain. Howbeit all the hindmost of them were slain with the sword, for they pursued them unto Gezer, and unto the plains of Idumea, and Azutus, and what is Jamina, and unto Jamina, so that there were slain of them upon 3,000 men.
Okay, so here it is. They come with this big army of 5,000 men, and, you know, Israel is mal equipped to handle them when you look at their armaments and, you know, their weaponry. But here it is. They blow the trumpets and go after them, and they set them off running and end up killing and slaying, out of the 5,000, actually it was 6,000 when you include the horsemen. They end up slaying half of them. You know, so it just goes to show you our strength when we're under the Most High. Just like we were reading in in the book of Jasher.
Mhm.
That nobody could deal with us when we under the strength of the Most High. Continue reading.
Verse 17, and said to the people, be not greedy of the spoils, inasmuch as there is a battle before us. And Gorgias and his host are here by us, our enemies, and overcome them. And after this, ye may boldly take the spoil.
So he's saying, don't worry about collecting the spoils right now, because they had ran them off of their camp and they ran past where they were encamped and started going towards other cities. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so when they came back, they was like, don't worry about spoiling them and taking anything now, because we still in the heat of battle.
Mm-hmm.
Once we deal with them completely, then we'll worry about spoiling them. Continue.
Verse 19, and as Judas was yet speaking these words, there appeared a part of them looking out of the mountains, who, when they perceived that the Jews had put their host to flight and were burning the tents, for the smoke that was seen declared what was done. When therefore they perceived these things, they were sore afraid, and seeing also the host of Judah in the plain ready to fight, they fled every one into the land of strangers.
And see, the thing is, we didn't read this, but previous to, matter of fact, let's go ahead and read it. Previous to chapter 4, let's go to chapter 3, verse 41. So here it is. It says, they fled every one into the land of strangers, because they had perceived what Israel's capabilities were. And so they were afraid to deal with them. But previous to this battle, let's look at what the strangers were doing. Go to verse 41.
First Maccabees chapter 3, verse 41. And the merchants of the country, hearing the fame of them.
When it says the fame of them, it's talking about the footmen and the horsemen of Gorgias. Continue.
Took silver and gold very much with servants, and came into the camp to buy the children of Israel for slaves. A power also of Syria, of the land of the Philistines, joined themselves unto them.
So Syria and the Philistines did the same thing. So all these surrounding nations are hearing about the ensuing battle, and they like, well, here, let's get our money together, so after the battle's over, we can buy the slaves of Israel, because evidently Israel's going to lose, because the fame of the other army was so well renowned. You know, Antiochus had just taken down Egypt, and now he dealt with Israel before, and so now they about to have another battle. So they like, okay, we're gonna profit from this. We're gonna buy the slaves. But there were no slaves to be bought. Let's go back to chapter 4, verse 23.
First Maccabees chapter 4, verse 23. Then Judas returned to spoil the tents, where they got much gold and silver, and blue silk and purple of the sea, and great riches. After this, they went home and sung a song of thanksgiving, and praised the Most High in heaven, because it is good, because his mercy endureth forever.
And so after the battle was won, they didn't sit back and praise Judas, and Judas didn't sit back and say, I did a good job. They praised the Most High. Continue.
Verse 25. Thus Israel had a great deliverance that day. Now all the strangers that had escaped came and told Lysias what had happened, who, when he heard thereof, was confounded and discouraged.
All right, now Lysias, this is another name that just kind of came out of nowhere. He was second in command to Antiochus, like a vice president maybe, because Antiochus, he had left the capital and went to Persia to acquire. Persia was a tributary to Antiochus, so he went there to acquire gold and silver and to tax them to pay for this military raid that he was doing on Israel. So he left Lysis in his stead to control. Before he left, he was like, I want you to go into Israel and do this, this, and this. And so Lysias then gave the orders to Gorgias. All right. So that's who Lysias is. Continue.
Verse 26. Now all the strangers that had escaped came and told Lysias what had happened, who, when he heard thereof, was confounded and discouraged, because neither such thing as he would were done unto Israel, nor such thing as the king commanded him were come to pass.
So he's confounded and discouraged because King Antiochus had given him directions to do this, and he's hearing from those who escaped that none of what he had told them to do was happened. And so he knows that this king is away, and when he come back, he's going to have to deal with Antiochus and why he wasn't able to accomplish what Antiochus had told him to accomplish. Continue.
Verse 28. The next year thereof, therefore, following Lysias, gathered together 70,000 chosen men of foot and 5,000 horses, that he might subdue them.
All right. So now a year later, he recuperates and he's like, okay, I sent 6,000 the first time. This time I'm going to send 70. We know a score is 20. So he sent 3 of those, which is 60. He sent 60 choice men on foot, and then he sent 5,000 horsemen. So we're talking about all in all 65,000 men. All right. That he might subdue them. All right, continue.
Verse 29. So they came into Idumea and pitched their tent at Bethshur, and Judas met them with 10,000 men. And when he saw that...
Okay, now look at these numbers. We talking about 65,000 versus 10,000. 5,000 of that 65 are on horse. All right, continue reading.
Verse 30. And when he saw that mighty army, he prayed and said, Blessed art thou, O Savior of Israel, who didst quell the violence of the mighty man by the hand of thy servant David.
He draws strength from what the Most High has done in the past, rather than looking at it and being like the 10 spies that went in to spy out Israel. And saying, oh, there's giants in the land. Rather than doing that, he had a spirit like Joshua and Caleb. He looked at what had happened in the past. He referred to Pharaoh originally. Now he referring to what David was able to do in the promised land. Continue.
Verse 30. And when he saw that mighty army, he prayed and said, Blessed art thou, O Savior of Israel, who didst quell the violence of the mighty man by the hand of thy servant David, and gavest the host of strangers into the hands of Jonathan, the son of Saul, and his armor bearer. Verse 31. Shut up this army in the land of thy people Israel, and let them be confounded in their power and horsemen. Make them to be of no courage, and cause the boldness of their strength to fall away, and let them quake at their destruction. Verse 33. Cast them down with the sword of them that love thee, and let all those that know thy name praise thee with thanksgiving. Verse 34. So they joined battle, and there were slain of the host of Lysias about 5,000 men. Even before them were they slain.
So, like, something that we can take from this is like we see the beginning, the middle, and the end of these battles. Previous to going into battle, he prays. And he refers to what the Most High has done and acknowledges what the Most High can do. And then we see after he has done that and has put it in the Most High's hands, then we see what happens. The fruition of it is that he's able to conquer. And then we notice that after the battle has been won, he sends up praise. And like that's an example for us day to day. We're not going out fighting people physically, but we always having a spiritual battle. Rather somebody's sick, or rather you trying to spread the truth to a family member, or whoever or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that prayer life is very important. That's how you win the battle before you even before the battle begins. And then once you have victory, give the Most High praise.
Mm-hmm.
Continue.
Verse 35. Now when Lysias saw his army put to flight, and the manliness of Judah's soldiers.
So he kills 5,000 of 65,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still like 60,000 of them to his 10, and they running.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, and just with being in the physical, you can't see how that would happen or why 60,000 people would run from 10,000. But it just shows the power of the Most High. He could, I mean, you know, it when we read Jasher, Judah was sending whole nations by himself in flight.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't the power of Judah. It was the power of the Most High.
Mm-hmm.
Continue.
Verse 35. Now when Lysias saw his army put to flight, and the manliness of Judah's soldiers, and how they were ready either to live or die violently.
It was like, we ready to die for this thing. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
He went into Antioch and gathered together a company of strangers, and having made his army greater than it was, he proposed to come again into Judea.
So now he has more than he had initially. Mm-hmm. He goes and makes another army after he sees what happened after their initial combat. He goes and he gets a bunch of strangers, and he makes an army even greater than what he had before. Mm-hmm. So he anteed up on top of what he originally had. Go ahead, continue.
Verse 36. Then said Judas and his brethren, behold, our armies are discomfited.
Our enemies.
Our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary.
Okay, so after he had ran them off, he was like, you know, they're afraid of us. They're discomforted. Let us go while they're, you know, doing what they're doing. Let us go into the sanctuary and let's clean up what they've come in and destroyed. Mm-hmm. This is now we're to the point of explaining the Feast of Dedication. Mm-hmm. Continue.
Verse 37. Upon this, all the hosts assembled themselves together and went up into Mount Zion. And when they saw the sanctuary desolate and the altar profaned.
The altar was profaned because of the swine that had been altered on it, that had been sacrificed on it. Go ahead.
And the gates burned up, the shrubs growing in the courts, as in a forest or in one of the mountains. Yea, in the priest's chamber pulled down.
Imagine, like, when we read about the magnificence of the sanctuary and how it was built originally, and all of the gold adornments on the pillars and all the brass, and it was just I can imagine how beautiful it was. And to go in there and to see it desolate and seeing shrubs starting to grow up through the field, and, you know, just to see how it had fallen from his glory, I can only imagine how they felt. Continue.
Verse 39. They rent their clothes and made great lamentation and cast ashes upon their heads.
This is a sign of mourning. Throughout the Old Testament, it you know, when someone would pass or something that would happen that would cause them to mourn, this is how they would mourn. Continue.
Verse 40. And fell down flat to the ground upon their face, and blew an alarm with the trumpets, and cried toward heaven. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary.
So within Jerusalem, you know, there was sets of walls. It was walls around the city, which was like the fortress or the fortification. And then there was walls around the sanctuary. So he's saying, while we're in here doing this in the sanctuary, there were still, as we read previously, the strangers were in the fortress, were in Jerusalem. So he's like, y'all deal with them and hold them off while we sanctify the sanctuary and clean it up. Continue.
Verse 42. So he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the law, who cleansed the sanctuary and bear out the defiled stones into an unclean place.
And so they had to get rid of everything that had been touched and made unclean. Because this was supposed to be a clean, set apart, holy place. Like, it was given specific instructions on building it. Like, you couldn't use stones that had been cut. You couldn't cut any stones to make the altar, and just like the priest or anyone who came to offer before the altar, they had to be clean. So if they had done something that would cause them to be unclean, or if any of Israel had done something that had caused them to be unclean, they couldn't come into the sanctuary. And so everything that was in the sanctuary had been defiled because of Antiochus coming in there doing all this ridiculousness. Basically, what he did was the abomination of desolation. And when you just break that down, abomination, when it says the swine is an abominable thing, these are things that are totally unclean. And so they made the temple desolate through abomination. And so now they have to come in and clean up everything that has been made abominable. Go ahead.
Verse 44. And when as they consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profaned, they thought it best to pull it down.
And he's like, let's just pull it down. Let's start over. Go ahead.
Lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathens had defiled it. Wherefore they pulled it down. Verse 46. And laid up the stones in the mountains of the temple in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to show what should be done with them. Then they took whole stones according to the law, and built a new altar according to the former.
And when it says whole stones, that goes back to what I was saying before. It says you couldn't use a hewed stone, which means a stone that was cut. You couldn't form it and then place it in there. You had to use whole stones. I'm not exactly sure why that was, but everything had a reason to it. That's something I may look into in the future, because I've kind of always wondered that. But go ahead.
Verse 48. And made up the sanctuary and the things that were within the temple, and hollowed the courts. They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlesticks, and the altar of burnt offerings, and of incense, and the table.
And when it says they brought the candlestick, that's the menorah. And that's why this is also referred to as the Feast of Lights. And you see them with Hanukkah, they light a candle per day or whatever. They get all that from us. They stole our ancestry and our heritage. So they took things, and even though they off on a lot of things, they still took symbolisms and some of the traditions of our people. Continue.
Verse 50. And upon the altar they burnt incense, and the lamps that were upon the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light in the temple. Furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table, and spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they had begun to make. Now on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month of Caslu,
yeah.
Caslu, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning.
Meaning early, or early in the morning. Continue.
Verse 53. And offer sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings, which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathens had profaned it, even that was it dedicated with songs and citharns and harps and cymbals.
So it's referring to the day that they chose to do these things. It says in verse 52, now on the 5 and 25th day of the 9th month, which was called Caslu, they offered sacrifices according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings, which they had made. And then it says, look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it. So they took, matter of fact, let's just go back to First Maccabees chapter 1 and get some understanding on this, because Israel decided to offer sacrifices on the very day that the heathens had come into the sanctuary and defiled it. Maccabees, First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 59. Actually, first read 54 and then jump to 59.
First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 54. Now in the 15th day of the month of Caslu, in the 140th and 5th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar and built idol altars throughout the city of Judah on every side.
Jump down to 59.
Verse 59. Now the 25th day of the month they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of the Most High.
This altar of the Most High was the altar that was in the sanctuary. They defiled it on the 25th day of Caslu. All right, that's the ninth. That was the 9th month. But as we look at Caslu today, and you line that up with the Gregorian calendar, that month falls between November and December. So notice that these heathens, they decided to offer up sacrifices. What verse did you stop at?
Verse. You talking about in chapter 1?
Yeah, here in chapter 1.
59.
Let's go ahead and finish reading it before I break it down. Go ahead.
Verse 59. Now the 25th day of the month they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of the Most High, at which time, according to the commandments, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised.
Because Antiochus has said not to circumcise your children. Because the Greeks did not circumcise their children, and he wanted them to be as they were. Continue.
Verse 61. And they hanged the infants about their necks and ruffled their houses and slew them that had circumcised them.
So on this day, they even hung the infants. So they sacrificed the women who had children that were uncircumcised, and then they hung the infants that were uncircumcised, or I'm sorry, circumcised. And then they went throughout the homes of the Israelites looking for those who had been circumcised. Continue.
Verse 62. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing.
Okay, so this is what they were doing on the 25th day of Caslu. And as I was saying before, the heathens chose this day to sacrifice the children of Israel and to sacrifice swine on this altar. I don't think that this day was just some day that they just randomly chose. This day, as you look in the history of the 25th of December, it has a history of pagan worship. And so here it is, in this day we see, previous to the sanctuary being reclaimed and re-sanctified and rededicated, the heathens had chose the 25th day of the 9th month, which is known as Caslu in as we're reading it. But as you line it up with the Gregorian calendar, Caslu falls between November and December. So, you know, approaching December 25th as we are, this so-called holiday that that's supposed to have Christian connotation to it, but yet and still everything about it is pagan. You know, the scripture even in itself is very plain and clear about, you know, not bringing a Nimrod stick in your yard, in your house, and decorating and all these things, but yet and still people want to say, well, that's not why I have it here. But no one stops to take to look at what the Yule log significance is, what the wreath significance is, what the significance is of the tree, you know, or what even the significance is of the day. Instead of taking time to look at it, the December 25th and all those other symbolic things, the mistletoe, we just say, oh, well, that's Jesus's birthday. Even though people understand, and it's becoming more and more understood and more accepted by, so-called scriptural authorities, that it's obvious Christ was not born on December 25th. Mm-hmm. So why is this day, held in such esteem? Well, we see what happened before Christ was even born. This goes back before the birth of Christ. What was happening on December 25th? Mm-hmm. All right. So let's jump back to where we left off in chapter 4. Read verse 54 again.
First Maccabees, chapter 4, verse 54. Look at what time and what day the heathens had profaned it. Even that was it dedicated with songs and citharins, and harps and cymbals.
So they said, let's look at the day that they profaned it. And on that day, we're going to rededicate it. And they rededicated it with songs and instruments, harps and cymbals and so forth. Continue.
Verse 55. Then all the people fell upon their face, worshiping and praising the Most High of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness and sacrifice, that sacrifice of deliverance and praise. Verse 57. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed and hung doors upon them. Thus was there very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away.
So within all this, they rebuilt the walls of protection. They rebuilt the gates that had been burnt down, and they rededicated the sanctuary. Continue.
Verse 59. Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of dedication of the altar should be kept in their seasons from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month of Caslu, with mirth and gladness.
So now we see the establishment of the Feast of Dedication. Judas proclaims, and all of Israel, that from year to year within its season, we will keep this dedication of the altar, starting on the 25th day of Caslu, the 9th month, and it will run for 8 days. And that's why the Hanukkah, they have the 8 days, the candle that has the menorah with 8 candles on it, and they light it per day. See, and that just goes back to show they know more about our history than we do. I remember thinking about Hanukkah and being like, that's crazy. What are they doing with a candle and, lighting candles, and what is Hanukkah? And I'm thinking, I'm all Christmas, you know what I'm saying? And so that just goes to show just how off we've been. And, it's been there the whole time, but thanks to the Most High, these things are being revealed. Go ahead and continue with verse 60.
Verse 60. At that time also they built up the Mount Zion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the Gentiles should come and tread it down, as they had done before. Verse 61. And they set there a garrison to keep it, and fortified Bethshur to preserve it, that the people might have a defense against Idumea.
Okay, so that is the explanation of the Feast of Dedication. Let's go into the Bible and look at John chapter 10, the Gospel of John chapter 10, verse 22.
St. John chapter 10, verse 22. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. And Yeshua walked in the temple in Solomon's porch.
And I just wanted to come to this scripture just to show that even during Christ's time, he kept the Feast of Dedication. And so for people to say, it really just goes back to the law again. For people to say, we don't have to do this anymore, it's not true. Mm-hmm. We still do have to keep these holy days. Let's jump to 1 Corinthians 6 and 19.
First Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19. What? Know ye not that your bodies is the temple of the Holy Spirit, which is in you, which ye have of the Most High? Ye are not your own. Verse 20. For ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify the Most High in your bodies and in your spirit, which are the Most High's.
And so this is a time even to rededicate your personal temples. Mm-hmm. Just as this is the dedication of the Feast of Dedication, it was done as in remembrance of what happened, how they rededicated the actual physical temple. Mm-hmm. But we know we don't have that temple on the earth anymore. We are the temple. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. So this is a time for us to take to rededicate our temples. And in that even refers to and means to, to cleanse out, to reevaluate how we've been dealing with our temple, what we've been putting in our temple, mm-hmm. how we've been dressing our temple, how we've been, treating our temple, mm-hmm. rededicate and cleanse up our physical bodies. Go ahead and go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16.
First Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. Know ye not that ye are the temple of the Most High, and that the Spirit of the Most High dwelleth in you? If any man defileth the temple of the Most High, him shall the Most High destroy. For the temple of the Most High is holy, which temple ye are.
All right, that's self-explanatory. So, that goes for, all the way from, eating swine's flesh to smoking a cigarette, especially smoking weed and all these, smoking anything that's going to destroy the body, even eating food that's not abominable. Mm-hmm. You sitting around just binging out on pop and sugar, that's not good for the temple. Mm-hmm. That's why it's important that we understand. And I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not speaking now like of what according to the Bible. This is me talking about from what I know according to foods that are not good for our bodies. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying this is a law not to eat sugar. Don't get that misunderstood. But I do know the repercussions of sitting around eating sugar all day. Mm-hmm. Is bad for our bodies. So we have to evaluate what it is that we sit down and put inside our temples. Mm-hmm. Rather it's food, rather it's fornicating, rather it's, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. This is a time to sit and reevaluate and be like, you know what? I can work on this one thing here. I can give up this for my health's sake. So this is, you can even look at this dedication as a time to look at yourself and your health, because it is a temple. And if your temple is broken down, mm-hmm. then what good is your temple? Most of what our sicknesses and illnesses come from, along with sin and spiritual issues, but most of our sicknesses and things come from the fact that the way we take care of our temple. Mm-hmm. So let's take this as a time to evaluate our habits and to try to rededicate our temples and to take care of them better. All right, that's all I have for today.